Greetings and welcome, everyone. This is Dr. Barrett-Fox back with you to talk about another wonderful technical writing genre, writing instruction manuals or sets of instructions. And I'll start by saying that I think in some ways this is a deceptively simple looking genre. It's a genre that doesn't appear to be, rhetorically subtle or sophisticated, but that's actually not the case. That's actually not the case. The nuts and bolts of writing a good set of instructions or instruction manual are actually pretty precise, and the weight that they carry, the weight of that precision, is that there is a real sense of legal liability that's built into writing instructions, right? In a way that's precise and concise, and in a way that guides the person right through a set of steps in a way that's safe, right? So there is this really very concrete kind of ethical obligation that is sort of enmeshed in the writing of sets of instructions or instruction manuals. If you do it improperly, or if you do it in a way that puts people at risk, you could be sued, and your company could be sued for wrongful death that might occur on a job site because of a misuse of a particular tool because the instructions weren't written correctly. So while in a lot of cases, we're actually doing the work together of kind of like building the connective tissue between the tech writing genre and this kind of larger ethical issue, with instruction manuals and sets of instructions, that kind of ethical urgency is really built into the genre in ways that are straightforward and important. So I mentioned this little moment from Harriman here on the slide. That is the two things that we should keep in mind when we are creating sets of instructions are precision and concision, right? To be precise and concise. But also, if you kind of back away, if you're going to step away from the set of instructions a couple steps, you can really extrapolate what Harriman tells us is kind of the central thrust or the central purpose of an instruction manual, and that is to ensure the correct use of a given product with the purpose of safeguarding the reputation of a firm. So this is two things that you want to do. You want to make sure somebody can use the product that they bought, right? By by reading through your instructions, but you also want to safeguard the liability of the company that you're working for. Really important. And we'll circle back to Harriman at the end of the lecture, but I thought that was a really nice way to kind of frame what we're doing today, what the stakes are, and why such detailed attention to nuts and bolts is important. So let me move forward here. So I want to start with last first, which is funny because that's a dumb pun, but I couldn't help myself. English teachers, and one thing that the last chapter gives us, I actually didn't even have you read this section. It's the beginning of the chapter 7 section, but I wanted to dip from that before we got into 7.7. Because I thought it was important for you guys to have a sense of what different kinds of descriptions are doing. And you might have never thought this before. You might have never kind of thought about this question. Are there different types of descriptions? I thought description was one mode of discourse. And that's actually how, people used to teach freshman English in the 70s and 80s, modes of discourse. But there are different kinds of descriptions, and it's really useful for you to have a sense of what those kinds of descriptions are before you get into writing sets of technical instructions, because you have to define that thing. You have to offer definitions of the thing before you can even move us into a set of steps. And so there are three kinds of sort of technical descriptions, definitions, etc., that I wanted you to get kind of firmly in place before we moved into the rest of the nuts and bolts of generating an instruction manual that can be useful and still maintain our sort of ethical relationship to the subject matter in terms of our own legal liability. So the first kind of description to pay some attention to is a mechanism description. You're going to need to have one of these. This is a detailed overview of physical aspects of a tool, of a machine, of another mechanical device that has moving parts and is designed to perform a specific function. So these could be product descriptions for sales or manufacturing, documentation of design specifications, infographics, which we've had some experience with, etc. And I want to say why that's so important, because you have to really set the parameters of what you're talking about before you can walk somebody through the operation of that thing. So after sort of mechanism descriptions, then we move into process descriptions. So here we detail a series of events that happen in particular sequence in order to achieve a specific outcome. These can be categorized as non-instructional processes, such as a process analysis of how an internal combustion engine works, or natural processes like photosynthesis, as well as instructional processes, and this is where we are, such as recommended or required procedures and explicit step-by-step instructions to be followed. And again, this little guide from the last piece directs us to 7.7, from which we will be extrapolating most of the information today. And the third type of technical description you might need is a definition, right? Here, you clarify the specific meaning of a thing, often related to a specific context, or you express the essential nature of the terms being defined. These can range in length from a simple clarifying phrase to an extended document of several pages. Definitions will also often include detailed descriptions and visuals to illustrate ideas. And so what we'll want to do is to keep these three kinds of technical descriptions in mind, because they are going to be kind of brought in and put to use inside of a technical instruction manual. So one of the reasons LAST is so useful, and one of the reasons I love her book so much, apart from the fact that it's free and open access, which is awesome, and democratic and cool, right, is that she gives us these wonderful kind of generic overviews. We get a sense of what a technical description kind of would look like from the top down. And she gives us this template, and I think it's absolutely worth working through. And so this is when you're getting to the point where you're thinking of creating your own. You're like, okay, what are the key components? What are and we'll go through a couple examples of what this might look like. But you're asking, what are the key components of this? What do I have to know that I have to be responsible for? Well, the first is audience and purpose. That sounds familiar, right? So who's going to read this and why? Then definition and function. What is it? What does it do? What is its purpose? Then the overview. You describe its overall appearance, shape, size, color, and we'll get into more detail here. Components and explanations. Here you describe the component parts of a thing, choosing the things that are most relevant, right? And then you explain how they work together. And then you offer some visuals, right? What kind of visuals do you want to offer? Diagrams, photographs, cutaway views, exploded views. Then you give us a conclusion. Do you need to offer some history, some warnings? This is important. How not to use the thing, right? How to avoid using the tool, context, costs, etc., and then references if you do use any in your writing. So audience, purpose, definition, function, overview, components, visuals, conclusion, and references. And I wanted to start here because I think it's the most general version of a template that we can use. And it should be pretty easy to kind of carry along with you as you move throughout your process. There are some other details that I want you to keep in mind while you're inventing your own instruction manual here. And that is, of course, because in an instruction manual, we are moving through a series of steps, right, to get to a particular end. Organization is key. Organization is key. So what that means is that you've got to have some kind of a logical principle that's sort of animating your discussion or your description. Perhaps the way you're organizing things is the old-fashioned way, top to bottom, left to right, inside to outside. The most important features to the least important features, central components to peripherals, material properties, etc. And these are going to depend on whether you choose, say, left to right or inside to outside, or most important to least important. That's going to depend on the object about which you're generating these instructions, right? So if I were writing instructions for an air fryer, I wouldn't describe all the stupid little parts of an air fryer that I don't need to know about, right? I would probably choose the most important to least important functions. Okay, you push this button, for 10 seconds to, heat up your chicken McNuggets from yesterday or whatever. Because you're thinking about the audience. These people own an air fryer. What is it that they likely want to do? They likely want to eat. If they want to eat, then what do I need to teach them first, right? So I'm not going to go into all kinds of, technical information that's out of order and increases, right, their, the time of their process, the time their process will take. I want to get to, in this case, because it's an audience that's hungry for food, I want to get to what's important first. But of course, not everything is going to be laid out that way. If you're doing a stud gun, for instance, which is a tool that could kill a person, right? You probably don't want to move just from most important to least important features. You might want to move from in a more kind of comprehensive way, right? Just through information from the top down to the left to the right, or material properties, etc. In terms of the language that you want to use, we want this language to be precise. We want it to be concrete. Avoid vague or overly general terms. Use the correct terminology. This is where that definition is so important. You got to define terms as necessary for your audience. When you can't do something precisely, it's okay to use analogies. So you can use an analogy to describe an unfamiliar thing in terms of a familiar thing. You really should, though, try to use as concrete and objective language as possible. So avoid subjective language, avoid too much language, say, about your own feelings and that kind of stuff. You're not going to find language about the tech writer's feelings, in a really good instruction manual. Use the present tense. This is a fun but important little tidbit. Use the present tense and active verbs because people will be doing what it's saying to be doing. They will be enacting these things. And finally, use words that are vivid and create specific pictures in the reader's mind. Just a couple things, again, to keep in mind. Organization, how you might organize it, right? And again, not every one of these is going to be organized exactly the same way. It depends on the nature of the product that you're describing. But the language is generally going to be similar in terms of its absence of subjective language in particular. So in terms of writing instructions, there are two little lists here that I thought were super useful. And the first is what you need to generate, right, an effective set of instructions, right? The first is, again, and some of this is going to be a little redundant, but it's to the point of really knocking this home in your mind here. It's clear, precise, simple writing. You're going to need a thorough understanding of the procedure. So it's going to be really hard just to sit down and just write this out, right? You'll probably need to brainstorm, bubble it, throw down some visuals so you have a sense of, okay, X leads to Y leads to Z. Now, how do I explain that? So a thorough understanding of the process and all of its technical detail, including what components need to be defined and what order they need to be presented. You've got to be able to put yourself in the place of the reader. So these are the kinds of rhetorical situating concerns, right? How do you situate yourself rhetorically? Well, put yourself in the place of the reader, right? And put yourself in the place of a reader who doesn't bring much to the situation, right? So you want to in some ways speak to the least common denominator. You want to talk to people who need maximum instruction, because you don't want to assume that every member of your audience is going to have certain pieces of information about whatever tool you're describing, right? That's dangerous. You don't want to presume that they have that information. You're also going to want to cultivate the ability to visualize the procedure in detail and then to capture that on paper. And, finally, it's not bad to, if you have a friend, you're having supper, having coffee, or you're eating in the cafeteria, have a friend work through those instructions and see if any sort of moment in the procedure sticks out at them as being wonky or as kind of throwing them off. So run it by somebody before it comes to me. In terms of how to approach getting to this place of rhetorical comfort with the situation, there's this lovely list of preliminary steps on page 217 that we get from Lass. She says, do a really careful audience and task analysis. And I like this. I like combining the audience and task analysis, because in the case of an instruction manual, the audience is always going to be associated with a task, right? And so it's nice to combine those two together. So you're not just saying, oh, who makes up my audience demographically? You're actually saying, I'm not super interested in the demographics of this particular audience. I'm more interested in how this audience coalesces. This is supposed to be a Venn diagram. Coalesces with the particular task that I'm about to set out, right, in this set of procedures. And again, understand in advance how familiar you think the audience will be with the topic at hand. And again, I want you to err on the side that people don't know much, right? You don't want to assume they have knowledge that they don't, because that can get you into legal trouble later. Next, you're going to want to determine the number of discrete tasks involved in the procedure. Because we only have a week or so to work on this, I recommend choosing a procedure that's not infinitely long, right? I wish we had more time in some ways, but choose a task that is not going to overwhelm you just in terms of the sheer quantity of steps. Constantly be asking yourself to distinguish between the tasks and the tools, the tasks and the tools. Yeah, and the way you can do that, once you get the tool set aside, right, is you can start to think about how to group tasks. So not everything you're going to ask people to do in this set of instructions is made equal, right? It might be working to the end of what she calls groupings of tasks, right? So you're setting up your PC. In this case, you're unpacking stuff, and then you're installing stuff, and then you're doing the basic operating tasks, and then you're engaging routine maintenance procedures, and then you're troubleshooting. So it's totally reasonable in terms of headings and subheadings, right, to group tasks into chunks. In fact, if you do that, it's a lot cognitively easier for the reader, because they understand kind of what the smaller goal is that they're working for or working toward. So in terms of how to sort of open the document, last is really, really useful here. And I wanted to kind of to put this in here, and it's in verbatim, so you could work through it verbatim here. In the introduction, she wants you to offer a plan of kind of what you're going to do. So this could be you're indicating the specific tasks or procedure that's going to be explained, as well as the scope, so what will and won't be covered. You're in the introduction, you're indicating what the audience needs in terms of knowledge or in terms of background to understand the instructions. I always think of the little guy on IKEA instructions, right? There's a little cartoon man, and he's got like a little whatever he needs. He needs a little screwdriver or a little, Allen wrench or something, and that's always mapped out there in the introduction, right? You need to know what you're going to need to get it done. Then you give a general idea of the procedure and what it accomplishes, indicating sort of the conditions of when these instructions should or should not be used. And so, you don't want to explain to someone how to operate their, I don't know, to operate their toaster oven in a full bathtub of water, for instance, right? We want to avoid that because of electrocution risks, of course. So the conditions in which this procedure should be undertaken. And then you give a whole overview of the contents and instructions. Once you've offered that sort of general introduction, then you move into the warning, caution, or danger notices. These are important. Some people say that they should go at the end. I don't necessarily agree with that, though I do want to give you the freedom. If you feel like they go better at the end of yours than at the beginning, that's okay. But it's important to set these up, I think, to set them up early, or at least to go out of our way to alert the readers of the possibility of either ruining the equipment, messing up the procedure, or fundamentally, this is the one that we most worry about, right? Hurting themselves. So instructions also have to emphasize key points or exceptions, special situations, special notices, such as a note or a warning or a caution or a danger. But if there are things that could endanger, right, the person who's following this set of instructions, get those out early, make them clear. I think it makes sense to happen at an earlier stage in the steps. Again, if you want to have like a secondary warning at the end, or some visual semiotics of hazard, right? Like a warning lightning bolt for electricity or something like that, that seems appropriate as well. And maybe you can make use of both of those things. But getting those warnings out front helps to situate our own, or helps to mitigate our own liability risk. Then you might have to offer, after you've done the introduction, after you've done the general warning, then you might have to offer what Lass calls a technical background or theory. So she says at the beginning of certain kinds of instructions, you might need a discussion of background related to the procedure. So the background might be critical for certain kinds. So for example, you might have had some experience with those software applets in which you define your own colors by nudging red, green, or blue slider bars around. To really understand what you're doing, you need to have some background in color, she says. Similarly, you can imagine that for certain instructions using cameras, some theory might be needed there as well, right? So if there is a technical background that is presumed to be needed before you even begin the instructions, it's critical to mention that so that person can go and fill in what knowledge and information they need to fill in there. For equipment and supplies, again, you know, this is important. You have to define what everything is and how it works. So most instructions include a list of things you're going to need to gather before you start the procedure. This includes equipment, the tools you will use in the procedure, the supplies, things that are going to be consumed in the procedure. In instructions, these are typically listed either in a simple vertical list or in a 2-column list. Use a 2-column list, she says, if you need to add some specifications or some or all of the items, for example, brand names or sizes, amounts, types, models, etc. So if you've got different kinds of screws, you might want to list the size of the screws on the right side there. Now, once you've gotten the introduction, the warning, the technical background, and the equipment or supplies, the last thing you need to decide is what kind of steps, what kind of list of steps are you going to generate? She also has some really useful ones here. She's got fixed order steps, variable order steps, alternate steps, nested steps, or stepless steps. But we're not going to pay attention to stepless steps because I want you to have some steps for this assignment. So fixed order steps, this is what you're going to bump into most often. These are steps must be performed in the order that they're presented. So if you're changing the oil in the car, you're going to drain the oil is a step, right? You're going to drain that oil before you can put the new oil in. So these are numbered and they're usually vertically listed like that. Variable order steps are steps that can be performed in practically any order. So good examples are like troubleshooting guides that tell you how to check this or that if you're trying to fix something. Or you can use these kinds of steps practically in any order. And in this kind of a case, a bulleted list might be better than a numbered list because a numbered list suggests order, where a bullet list suggests that they could be done in any order. Alternate steps, this is almost where you're getting to a choose your own adventure novel, right? You get to this place in the process and you could do A, B, or C. So alternate steps are those in which 2 or more ways to accomplish the same thing can be presented. Alternate steps are used when various conditions might exist. So if that's the case, use bulleted lists with these, or you can insert them between the alternatives, or you can offer a lead-in indicating what the alternatives are that you're about to present. Nested steps as well might be used in cases when individual steps within a procedure are rather complex in their own right and need to be broken down into sub-steps. In this case, you indent further and you can sequence a set of sub-steps A, B, and C. Nested steps and fixed order steps are both going to bring you in a particular order. So that's why you've got A, B, and C there instead of 1, 2, and 3. Nonetheless, that order is made explicit because it's important that the steps are completed in that order. In terms of formatting your instructions, I'm sorry, it looks like a little bit of this got cut off. But you've got headings, lists, and special notices up here. So for headings, you're going to want any background section that you might have. So the heading section is going to be, for any section that you might need equipment or supplies, a general heading for the actual instructions or subheadings for individual tasks or phrases. So you're going to use those to set the chunks of your document apart. So supplies. So what will you need for this? And it's going to be a list and definitions of everything that you need. Then you move into the steps that you need to work through. Lists. Most kinds of instructions make use of lists, right? So these are step-by-step lists, vertical lists, and we talked about these in the last slide. And finally, special notices. This is where you're just alerting the reader to important things that they may miss, particularly alerting them to elements of the procedure that might be dangerous. So once you've generated your set of instructions, there's also, I think, a really nice little checklist here for how to revise, right? And so these are things to make sure once you've generated your artifact for this week, to go back and make sure that you've done correctly. So have you, A, clearly indicated the exact procedure to be explained? Have you provided an overview of content? Have you indicated audience requirements? Have you used various steps of lists wherever appropriate? In particular, numbered lists, right, for sequential steps. Have you used headings and subheadings to divide the main sections and the subsections into logical, coherent order? Have you used special notices or heads ups as appropriate? Have you used graphics to illustrate key actions and objects? And you might ask yourself in this case, well, when do I use a graphic? And I think we can go back to Tuft, right? In some of our early readings, and his kind of ink to information ratio. And I think the key here is that you use graphics or images or figures when it is when it saves space in ink, right? So if you can get something done in an image or a diagram that would take a lot more words, then use that image or diagram. So you're using graphics to illustrate key points, key actions, key objects. You're also using illustrations, diagrams, figures, etc., to be parsimonious, to save space and to save ink. And then you offer any kind of supplementary explanations if necessary. So the revision checklist is really useful, and it maps up really nicely with the other lists that we've looked at here. Now, I only wanted to spend just a moment on the Crystal Balena article about the sort of macro structure of instruction manuals. I love this article because it gives us this kind of wonderful cross-cultural sense of what instruction manuals look like in English versus what they look like in Spanish. And the truth is that they don't look that different, but it's the best breakdown that I could find in the literature in professional and technical writing about how to, like, it's the most precise kind of breakdown of what your steps and your moves might look like. And so again, I've taken it right from last textbook here, just so, oh, I'm sorry, this is from the Crystal Balena article. I've taken it right from her article here, and I've tried to put it in a relatively easy to read order. I mean, so it's move 1 down here, then you have move 2, and you move down. But I want to give you a sense of what this looks like with one caveat. One, there's a little image of a toaster here. This whole set of steps is actually a set of steps that they extrapolate, and they're using different objects at every step, which makes it kind of weirdly confusing. It would be nice if it was just steps of a toaster oven, but they didn't provide us that. But it's important to get a sense of what these moves and sort of these points and subpoints look like. So the first move you're making, and again, you have to forgive me, this is pretty nuts and bolts stuff, but the formatting here is crucial because of this kind of legal and ethical liability. So the first move you're making, right, is you're identifying what it is. So it's the manufacturing company. It's the name of the thing. It is the model of the thing. Maybe you give us some artwork of the thing, right? Then you give us the elements and the purpose. And then that's your second move, or that your first move, right? It's just telling us kind of what we're dealing with. Then you move into the praising of the thing. So self-praise. This is your new air fryer, and it allows you to prepare your favorite ingredients. And then some gratitude, congratulations, or thank you for purchasing the whatever vacuum cleaner. So first move, identification. Second move, praise. And this feels rhetorical to me, right? And this is cool because they've taken this from dozens of sets of instructions across 2 different cultures, right? 2 different languages, at least. So this is like good, what they're going to call this corpus linguistics, where you take a giant, that corpus in Latin means body. You just take a giant body of text, right? And you use that to find patterns that you might not otherwise see. So after identification and praise, the third move is objective description. Step 1, specification. Step 2, reference. Then you got the fourth move, function. Step 1, installation. Step 2, operating. Then you got the fifth move, advice. Step 1, extra tips. Step 2, recipes. Step 3, timing. Step 4, do's. Step 5, don'ts. And then step 6, maintenance. Step 7, troubleshooting. And then you have a sub-step in troubleshooting. Well, if you're having trouble removing bread from the bread pan, slide a flat rubber or plastic spatula along the sides to loosen the loaf. That's a sub-step in troubleshooting, right? Sub-step 2, the guarantee. The manufacturer does not accept responsibility for any damage or injury caused by improper or incorrect use. And then you've got sub-step 3, the helpline. And then step 8, legislation, safety. The wire, which is colored blue, must be connected to the terminal, which is marked with the letter N or colored black. than recycling and disposal. So this is another really useful framework for what you have to do when writing a set of instructions, how that really breaks down. And what's really fun, right, is that across languages, and this is nice, I include this just because it is reassuring in some ways, because we are dealing with a genre here that has such precise expectations and legal liability ramifications that I would have been surprised if there was a lot of variability, right, between, say, English language and Spanish language versions of instruction manuals. But luckily there is not. And that's the reason I wanted to include this slide here. English texts are more detailed than Spanish ones regarding the objective description and the legislation, the legal elements of it. But other than that, things line up very, very similarly. And so you see, again, their nice little list here of moves and steps. So identification, manufacturing, name, model, artwork, elements, purpose, praise, self-praise, gratitude, objective description, and specifications. And you get to see how many Spanish texts, how many English texts, and what percentage of those texts made use of those particular generic characteristics. So another useful set of moves here, and this is coming from the very first article. It's a nice extrapolation and kind of condensation of the moves that we just looked at from the Cristoblania article. So move 1 here is establishing contact with the reader towards the text and the product. Very similar to what we just saw from the last article. You're thanking the user for buying the product, praising the product, you're contacting, you're offering contact information for registering the product, and you're urging the reader to read the manual. You might offer a table of contents. You might offer definitions and descriptions of symbols, description of the product, safety warnings. Then you're inducing action, right? This is where you, on the second move here, you're inducing action. You have the installation process, package disposal, preparation, operation, etc. Move 3, you're anticipating and solving problems. And move 4, you're continuing the contract with questions of service. So again, these are all giving you a sense, right, of what technical instructions tend to look like across both English language and Spanish language contexts of generation. And sort of the last thing I want you to think about when you are generating your work for this week's unit is also how you're going to put to use meta discourse. Now, I don't want you to spend a ton of time on this, but it is important that you kind of have a little section of your brain sort of cordoned off for this use of meta discourse. What is meta discourse? Well, meta discourse is language about language. Language about language. And it's something that you're going to use really parsimoniously in this particular tech writing genre. You're not going to have a lot of language about how you feel about the language you're writing, right? It's not about you per se as the writer, the generator of this technical manual. But there are 2 instances, right, in which you are going to use meta discourse and in which it's totally acceptable. I wanted you to be able to know, A, that meta discourse is okay in tech writing genres, and particularly in the genre of the instruction manual. But I also wanted you to know the 2 kinds of meta discourse that tend to get used when we're creating this genre. And the first is interactive meta discourse. The second is interactional, and they might sound similar, but they're not the same. So interactive meta discourse concerns the ways writers signal the arrangement of their texts based on their appreciation of the reader's likely knowledge and understandings. So this is the kind of meta discourse that you will see in a traditional essay. In this essay, I will argue this, and this, right? And you see in a thesis statement or a central claim, right? In this essay, I will argue X, Y, or Z. That is interactive meta discourse because you're showing the reader what moves you're going to make in the text. But there are also moments in the generation of this particular technical writing genre, right? Of instruction manual or sets of instructions, where you're going to do interactional meta discourse, which is where you're actually chiming in on concerns about your own explicit interventions. So you're commenting on the material that you're writing. You're evaluating the material, right? So whereas the first, interactive meta discourse is saying, I'm going to do this, this, and this, kind of showing you your way through the text. Interactional meta discourse is your chance to kind of evaluate a particular thing where you're hedging. This is where you might hedge in particular. So this helps involve the reader in the text. And so you got hedges here, like if you turn it left, it might do this. You know, might is a nice hedge, or perhaps, or possibly, or unfortunately, or I agree, or surprisingly, or note, this might be surprising. Or you can see that X, Y, or Z, right? And this, instead of moving the reader through the structure of the piece, is actually showing the complexity of a particular moment in the process. And so be aware that those two kinds of meta discourse are completely acceptable, but it's really important that you know the difference and can kind of work the reader through the document using both of them. So that's all I have for you today. Again, a little shorter than usual, kind of nuts and bolts, but I want to say again that it feels nuts and bolts in some ways because it is so precisely tied to the ethical obligation of creating instructions by which people can get done what needs to get done. And in the process, they do not get hurt. We are legally, we are ethically obligated to create instructions that do no harm. Thank you all so much and have a lovely, lovely day.